The joint hearings of the two select committees will come to order. We begin this morning with continuation of questions to Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, you understand that you remain under oath, do you not?
I do, sir.
And we begin with Senator Mitchell. Senator Mitchell, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Rodriguez.
Good morning, sir.
Mr. Rodriguez, you testified yesterday that on August 8th, 1986, you came to Washington and met with Donald Gregg, the National Security Advisor to the Vice President, to tell him about your concerns about the Nicaragua resupply operation. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, sir.
And you told him largely those things which you told us yesterday. Is that correct, about
Yes, sir.
your concerns? Now, during the time you were meeting with Mr. Gregg, he was taking notes, was he not?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, I direct your attention to Exhibit FIR number 5 in your book there.
I got it, sir.
You have that before you. That's 3 pages of handwritten notes. The stationery has printed at the top, Office of the Vice President, Washington, D.C., and handwritten just above that on the first page are the words, Felix, 8 August 1986. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And have you had an opportunity to see these notes before today, Mr. Rodriguez?
Not before today, sir, no.
Not before today. This is the
Well,
first...
I was showed yesterday by the committee.
Yes.
But
All right.
not before that.
All right. And do you recognize these as notes that Mr. Gregg was taking as you were talking to him on August 8th, 1986?
He was taking notes, sir, but I
Yeah.
could not recognize whether it was these
Well,
or
the
what it was.
first couple of sentences after the notation Felix 8 August 86 at the top, the first couple of sentences says, using Ed Wilson Group for supplies, Felix used by Orly to get Contra plane repaired at, and then the location is deleted. You said that to Mr. Gregg just as you said it to us here yesterday, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir, in the whole context.
Yes. And later on it says, hand grenades bought for $3, sold for $9. You said that to Mr. Gregg?
Yes, sir,
just
I mentioned it
as
to
you
him.
said that yesterday. Later on it goes on to talk about Mr. Gadd engaged in a rip-off, and you described that yesterday, and you told that to Mr. Gregg, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, it also says in here, in about the 6th sentence, a swap of weapons for dollars was arranged to get aid for the Contras. You did not say that to us here yesterday, and my first question is, did you say that to Mr. Gregg?
No, sir, and I don't think it's very clear the way it's written here. A group of maker for dollars, so it's very unclear in the handwriting either, but never said that, sir.
Yeah, it says, actually the words are a swap of weapons for, and then it has a dollar sign, was arranged to get aid for Contras. Well, is there anything else in this memorandum, in these notes that Mr. Gregg was taking while you were talking, that you did not say?
No, sir. There is nothing there different that, but
Well-
that part I don't recall at all.
Well, let me see if I understand this now. You were meeting with Mr. Gregg in his office. You were telling him about your concerns with the Nicaraguan resupply operation.
Right.
He was taking notes.
Right.
These 3 pages of notes are his notes of that conversation, and it's your testimony that every other sentence in these notes reflects what you said to him, except for this one sentence that's in the middle.
That's correct. You can say that.
So all of the sentences that he wrote before that one sentence accurately reflect what you said, and all of the sentences that he wrote after that one sentence accurately reflect what you said, but that one sentence regarding a swap of weapons for dollars arranged to get aid for the Contras, you did not say.
No, sir.
Do you have any explanation for how that could have appeared in his notes under these circumstances,
No, sir.
Mr. Rodriguez?
No, sir.
Apart from what you said to Mr. Gregg, were you aware at that time of any swap of weapons for dollars to get
No,
aid
sir.
for the Contras?
No, sir. We didn't know exactly where it was coming from or had any idea. As a matter of fact, we thought we were very short in funds the way it was arriving down there.
When did you first learn about a swap of weapons for dollars to get aid for the
Through the
Contras?
press, sir. When it came
Through
out
the
in the
press,
press.
you had no knowledge of it.
No, sir. Not whatsoever.
Would you agree, Mr. Rodriguez, that it is somewhat puzzling that a sequence of handwritten notes taken by someone with whom you were meeting, and which in every other detail accurately reflects what you said, should have in the middle of it one sentence which you now say you did not say at that time?
I don't know exactly where he wrote it there, what he meant. I think that he could answer better than I, but I have no
Yeah.
reason to puzzle me at all because I have a lot of respect for Mr. Gregg.
Oh, yes, indeed, and you respect him and you know him to be a truthful man,
Yes, sir.
don't you? And he would not write something in these notes if it had not been said, wouldn't you
Probably
think?
was thinking of something I cannot answer that. He will have had to answer that for you,
You
sir.
think he may have been thinking of something else?
I have no idea, sir.
So, in other words, your testimony simply is that you did not say that. You
Not that
did-
I recall.
Not that you recall.
Absolutely.
Well, if you didn't know about it at the time, then you could not have said it, could you?
Well, if you are referring to the Iran thing, no. It could have been something else.
Did you know of any other swap of weapons for dollars?
When I talked to him, it was a long time ago, so I have no idea exactly all the words that I told him.
Well,
That was my
my
recollection.
question now is not toward what you may have told him, but what you knew at the time.
No, at the
Did you
time, I
know-
didn't know anything like I told you before.
Yeah. You knew nothing about any swap of any arms for dollars to get aid for the Contras. Is that your testimony here today?
Yes, sir.
Now, if I might go to the first contact you had in this matter, and that is exhibit number 1. That is a letter dated September 20, 1985, that you received from Oliver North.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that
I got
correct?
it here.
The very first sentence says, "After reading this letter, please destroy it." Did you destroy this letter after reading it?
No, sir, I did not.
You did not. And this was the method by which you were first involved in this resupply operation. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
You had, in fact, gone to Central America not to work in the Contra resupply operation, but to assist another government in its counterinsurgency program.
That's correct, sir.
Right. And you then got this letter from Mr. North, who you knew at the time was an official of the National Security Council. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And so he recruited you into this Contra resupply effort.
I would not put it that way, sir, of recruiting me. He was just asking for my assistance in helping him implement this program.
He asked you for your assistance, and you
Recruitment
provided.
in our language
And-
have a little
well,
different meaning.
Yeah, I don't think that makes much difference. He asked you to help in this effort, and you agreed to help and did help.
Yes, sir.
And he told you that the aircraft will be used for airdrop aerial resupply to units inside Nicaragua.
That's correct, sir.
And he asked you to arrange for service space for those aircraft.
Yes, sir.
And he told you that this operation was so secret that you are the only person in the area who can set up the servicing of these aircraft.
Yes, sir.
And he told you that you must not even advise the chief of station of the CIA.
That's correct, sir.
You are a former CIA agent, are you not?
Yes, sir.
Right. And he told you that you should keep knowledge of this project from any people who were not working with him.
That's correct, sir.
Right. And you subsequently had many conversations and personal meetings with Mr. North about this matter, did you not?
We met a few times afterward.
And you talked to him.
I'm sure that he mentioned something
Yeah.
related to this.
Colonel Dutton yesterday described Colonel North as the co-commander of this operation. Do you agree with that? Would you describe him as the co-commander of this operation?
I will put it like the main sponsor of this operation,
The
sir.
main sponsor of this operation.
Yes, sir.
When there were disputes, it was to Colonel North to whom you and others ultimately went to have them resolved. Is that correct?
Dispute, when you
Disagreements, decisions that required some higher authority.
what is the question, sir?
It was Colonel North to whom you went for final decisions on these matters. Is
Yes,
that,
sir.
Yes. And when you were concerned about what was happening with this effort, it was to another government official, Mr. Gregg, who you went to express your concerns. Is that correct?
That was, as I testified before, sir, after we had a disagreement or little problem in that
Yes.
meeting on the 25th of June.
Right.
And at that
And-
point, we sort of disengaged, and I don't think we were in a very good term. the
You
two of
were,
us.
you were concerned about the operation, and you expressed those concerns to Mr. Gregg, who you knew to be a government official at that time. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Right. And you also had contact with other government officials in this operation, did you not?
Yes, I did, sir.
Mr. Steele?
Colonel Steele,
Yes. What was Colonel Steele's position?
the Mill Group commander in the area where I was.
The military
Commander.
commander in that area.
Yes, sir.
You also had contact with officials of the CIA?
Not very good. Our contact at the beginning with the aide was not that good.
Not that good.
No, sir.
But
The-
I'm not asking about the quality of the contact, but the fact that you did have contact.
Very little, very limited. As I testified to some of the people, I had trouble in establishing myself in there because of resentment, perhaps, by the chief of the station there of my presence there.
Yeah.
So our relation could be either close or often or good, if you could
Yeah.
put it that way.
So you were asked to participate by an official of the National Security Council, and you have described him as the main sponsor. You had contact with government officials during this operation, and when you had concerns, you expressed them to a government official. Would it be fair to say, Mr. Rodriguez, that this operation was controlled by the United States government?
I will not say so, sir.
No. What would you say?
I didn't consider that. I considered that Colonel Norris had the interest to help the Nicaraguan freedom fighter. I respect him for it. I help him, and I will continue to help anybody under the circumstances because I believe very strongly in the situation that they were having, as I testified to you before, and perhaps a lot of you doesn't have the experience that I did, but if you had, you would probably feel the same way.
Right.
That when you lose your country and you feel abandoned and don't have anybody to go to, if anybody comes to your help under those circumstances, it will be moral for me not to go to him or help him in any way or form to help these people.
And we respect and admire you for that, Mr. Rodriguez, but of course you would agree that the nature of your particular beliefs has nothing to do with the question of whether or not this was controlled by the government.
Well, in my opinion, it was controlled by Colonel North to a great
it was
extent.
controlled by
I
Colonel North.
personally didn't believe that the government itself was involved, and I so expressed it to
Did
the
you
local
think
people.
Colonel
down there.
North was acting as a private citizen in this matter?
Sir, it's not for me to determine that.
No,
I guess
I'm not
you-
asking you to determine. I asked you what you thought. Are you telling us now that you believe that Colonel North was acting as a private citizen outside of his capacity?
I am
as an
sure that
officer?
he might have some guidelines, sir, but I believe that if he felt so strongly about it, he would do a lot of things his own, that at the time, even to me, was kind of a very powerful lieutenant colonel.
Did you think Colonel Steele was acting as a private citizen in this matter?
No, sir. Colonel
Did you
Steve was
think
not
that
that involved in this type of operation.
No. Did you think that the CIA officials who were involved were acting as private citizens in this
I
matter?
learned a lot of the CIA later on during these hearings. I had not much knowledge of that at that time.
To the extent that they were involved, did you believe they were acting as private citizens?
No, sir.
And when you came to see Mr. Gregg to express your complaints, did you express them to him as a private citizen?
No, sir. At that time, I considered, first of all, that the Congress had approved the aid to the Nicaraguan freedom fighter. So at that point, I didn't consider it was illegal to talk to him.
Oh, no.
And I felt that at that point in time, it was preparation for the U.S. government officially take over the program, and he should have the benefit of my ideas at that time that he didn't know of what was being done in there, so that the state could not be making using the wrong people for this operation.
That's true, but, and I understand that. That has nothing to do with the question of whether or not Mr. Gregg was a government official.
No, he was.
He
There's
was
no
a
question
government
about
official.
it.
Right.
I am not denying that, sir.
Right. And notwithstanding all of that, it is your contention that this was not a government operation.
It was not as far as I knew.
Not as far as you knew. Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez.
Mr. McCollum.
Felix Rodriguez, you're quite a hero in many quarters. Obviously, you are a person who, in the Cuban-American community, has quite a reputation for your involvement with the Bay of Pigs and for your efforts in bringing about the demise of Che Guevara. And I'm very personally proud that you're here today and that I'm able to at least say that to you, because it's a high compliment as far as I'm concerned, what you've done in fighting communism in this hemisphere.
Thank you, sir.
We are concerned about a lot of important issues today, and though we both have biases against communism, the facts alone are what we're really about here. Last week, Mr. Rodriguez, I questioned Mr. Calero, and after my questioning of him, a caller called my office and said to my staff that Mr. McCollum was showing bias in favor of the Contras, and he couldn't understand why I would be biased, and he thought that was unfair being a committee member. Well, I want to say to you that I am biased in favor of the Contras and against the communist Sandinistas. That doesn't mean I'm biased in these hearings with regard to the subject matter. I personally, as I'm sure you do, deeply believe that the communist Sandinistas are internationalists, that if left to their own devices, they will carry their communist revolution into the neighboring countries, not through military invasion, but through subversion and through training of revolutionaries, and that if the Contras aren't successful, and I hope they are for this reason, but if they're not successful in stopping the expansion and stopping the Sandinista government, then at some point, United States young men and perhaps young women are going to lose their lives defending our national security interests somewhere in Latin America. I don't know where. And I do believe those things, as I think you do. I gather you do. But nonetheless, the importance of this hearing is not to debate our views on those kinds of issues. That may be the ultimate question later on. But I'm interested in getting at the facts, and I'm very open-minded about them. If people did things that were wrong in our government, or policies were wrong, and apparently some policies were wrong, and some people did do some things that weren't right in this matter, then we need to get the answers. Now, let's clarify a couple of things up front. Yesterday you testified, and I think I'm going to ask you simply to corroborate some things you've already said. At any time, have you ever discussed with Vice President George Bush anything about the Contra resupply operation?
No, sir.
At any time, have you ever been present when anyone else discussed with Vice President Bush anything about the Contra resupply operation?
No, sir.
Have you ever talked with anyone who said they talked with the Vice President about the resupply operation
No,
after
sir.
they'd done it? No. All right. Other than the occasion when you talked to Don Gregg, and it's been elaborated on in the question that just went before me on the memo,
Right.
other than that occasion, have you ever talked with any staff member of the Vice President's about the Contra resupply operation?
Not until the time that it's already a matter of record that the plane went down, sir.
All right. Not until after this was going on. In other words, not prior to the disclosure of Mr. Meese.
No, sir, that's
and
correct.
prior to our beginning to see the Tower Commission investigate and so on. All right. Now, I want to ask you about some things that you discussed yesterday regarding the pricing of some of the weapons and the grenades and so on that were sold to Mr. Calero. I am as disturbed as you are, but I think we need to establish the background a little bit better. You testified you were concerned about who was running the air supply operation because you'd heard from somebody else that the price of the grenades that were sold to Mr. Calero by Tom Kleins and Secord was $9, or these were $9, when in fact this other person told you that they should only be $3. Is that correct?
I guess I rounded down. It came out to 950, and they were selling 350. There was
roughly
a tremendous difference in it.
Okay. You also testified this was a purchase made by Mr. Calero for the FDN. And I assume that since Mr. Calero made all his purchases before the summer of 1985, that this purchase was made before Colonel North asked you to assist with the resupply operation in September of 85. Would that be correct? That the purchase we're talking about would have taken place before
That could
then?
be, sir. I only learned of it way later during this time, so I didn't even want told when this boat arrived in the neighboring country with this equipment. The day wasn't told me.
Well, someone else told you this. Who told you about the pricing?
The individual who picked up the manifest of the
What
boat
was
on
his
behalf
name?
of the local government.
What was his name?
Mario Delamico.
Mario Delamico?
Yes, sir.
Did you know that he was working for Ron Martin?
Yes, sir.
All right. And that Ron Martin was a competitor of General Secord and Klein's in selling arms to the Contras? Did you know that?
Well, I'm being aware of that now.
Okay. Did you hear General Singlob's testimony, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, sir.
Would it surprise you to learn that Mario Delamico took control of General Singlob's arms shipments to the Contras?
I just heard the testimony, sir.
And after Delamico took control, Delamico went to General Singlob and made a threat. Those are the words that General Singlob used, that Singlob should sell no more arms to the Contras, but that all arms should be sold by Delamico and Martin. Do you remember hearing that testimony? It concerns me, and the reason I raised it is that I know, because of your background and reputation, how sincere and concerned you are and were about the quality of the arms that were going down there. But we had competitors in the arms business here, one telling you something, one telling another something.
Right.
There was a competition going on down there, and I'm concerned that you may have been misled or otherwise used in this case, in this one instance at least. Does that concern you now, having heard General Singlob's testimony?
No, sir, because I never had any dealing as far as any business was concerned with any one of them. I know a lot of people through my years and career from all different sizes, or different places, but I had no business dealing with either one of them, and I have a lot of friends in that field, but not business
No,
whatsoever.
well, I didn't mean to imply you had business
No, but it means
dealings. I
that
don't
you
even want to.
didn't,
I didn't want to hint that. I'm just concerned. My concern was that because Martin and Singlob and Secord were all selling arms, they were all competitors, that information on pricing given to you or given to anybody could have been done intentionally to try to get the business away from the other person in the end. And you'd have no way of knowing independently of what they told you. You just have to either believe them or not believe them. And I guess that's the way that it was in this case. You did believe them, you were concerned, and I can understand that concern.
Well, I passed the concern to him. I expected he could tell me whether it was true or a lie, but I just was told that, that there was no money involved in the transaction.
He didn't tell you. You've said, Mr. Rodriguez, that you were acting as a liaison. I believe what the word you may have used was something different, but that's what the council interpreted it to be, and a liaison with the local authorities of the country in Central America where you were working. You were a liaison for helping the resupply operation with that government, with the authorities of that government. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. That's fair to say.
Now, apparently, when you went to the authorities in that Central American government where you were involved, they were pretty readily cooperative, at least it appears they were. Is that correct?
Well, sir, in that specific situation, you have to understand the situation that they are in, and they definitely will be to their best interest. And it coincides with the United States interest, but it was more to their best interest because it's much closer to them, the Nicaraguan communist country, to be able to help this effort.
Why? Explain that a little bit more. Why would it be in their best interest? What did they perceive it from you, what you observed?
Well, sir, everybody seems quite aware that the Nicaraguan communist country is a country like Cuba. We're trying to expand to neighbors, and it is one of the closest neighbors, the place where I was. And all the weapons that were received in the place where I was, which were actually from Vietnam, they have been transported through the Soviet Union to Cuba, to Nicaragua, and eventually found their place down there in Central America. And of course, it was their concern of the expansionism of the Nicaraguan government, and it was to their best interest to contain it in any way or form. And it was one of the places, one of the way of doing that.
Did you observe, while you were in this Central American country, assisting, as I recall, the efforts that this government was making to quell revolutionaries in that country, did you observe any indication that the Nicaraguan Sandinistas were supporting these revolutionaries, these rebels against the government of the country where you were?
Absolutely, sir.
What did you observe?
Well, sir, all the weapons that we captured were from Vietnam, and if I want, I can show you something that I brought in that we captured, if it is all right with you.
Well, if you've got something, I have no objection to your showing it to us. I can assure everybody I didn't know he brought anything in here, and I didn't ask him for that reason, but I'm curious, as everybody else is.
Nobody questioned that these people in this country, what their intention, who they respond to. This is the one that I captured on the 7th of November of 1985, sir.
What is that, Mr. Rodriguez?
That's a flag for one of the revolutionary government being supported by the Nicaraguan inside the country that I was. And it's very obvious, sir, that they doesn't have
Thank you very
their
much.
own national signal here, sir.
I think we've seen that. If you would, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, there's no question in my mind, should not be questioning anybody else's mind, who we were.
Well, there wasn't any question in my mind either, but I guess that's a kind of corroboratory piece of evidence in this particular instance.
Thank you, sir.
You say there were weapons and that this banner was captured, and there are... What is there anything else that you observed indicating the Sandinista government was supporting these revolutionaries in the country where you were?
Yes, sir. I interrogated one of the prisoners, one of the prisoners, in this specific case, one captain that turned himself into the country. And he explained the way that he was trained in Cuba. And he explained how he left the country where I was. He went to a southern country, got a visa there, and go to Nicaragua. Clandestinely, he went to a safe house in there, and he was transported 2 weeks later to Havana, Cuba, to receive training in there. After he received the training in Havana for 6 months in terrorism and different type of operation, he returned to Nicaragua. Then, in a very sophisticated manner, he used a Guatemalan identification to go into the neighboring countries of Honduras, and from there infiltrate the country where I was. And explained a lot of other people that were with them on a continuous basis, being trained in Havana, Cuba, based near Havana, Cuba, by the Cubans that were used in the country where I was and other Latin American countries.
Did your,
no question in my mind.
Did your observations with regard to the Sandinistas in your work in this Central American country influence your decision in any way when Colonel North and others asked you to help with this resupply operation?
Can you repeat that question again?
Well,
sir?
did your observations, did your work you were doing down there to help this government in Central America fight communist revolutionaries whom you have just said you saw support from Nicaragua for, did that support from Nicaragua Sandinistas influence you in any way when you were being asked to help the resupply operation?
Well, I already knew. I already had my mind made up on that. It was just corroboration of it.
Okay. In other words, you were ready to go help. It didn't take a lot of convincing to convince you to help the
I would
resupply
probably try
operation.
to convince them to help more, sir.
Okay. I think I've asked all the questions, Mr. Chairman, I have. Thank you.
Senator Treble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, I want to welcome you as well.
Thank you, sir.
And I know all my colleagues share my view that we have great respect for your courage and your ardent anti-communism. I think the record should reflect that you appear today without immunity and without counsel. I think that does say something about your past actions and also about the quality of your testimony here today. Now, my colleagues here on the panel have focused primarily on your relationship with public officials. I would like to focus on your relationship with the others involved in this resupply network. You testified yesterday that in September of 1985, Colonel North asked you to help out, and pursuant to that contact, you heard from an old friend, Rafael Quintero. You indicated further that you all had served together in the Bay of Pigs initiative.
Yes,
now, my understanding is that there came a time that you parted company, that that relationship came to an end. Why was that?
That was in the late 70s when I learned of their close relationship with Mr. Wilson, when I believe that Mr. Wilson was dealing with Gaddafi, which I consider enemy of Cuba and enemy of the United States.
So Mr. Quintero then was doing business with Edwin Wilson.
Well, Mr. Quintero was associated with people that were making business with Mr. Wilson.
And Edwin Wilson is the CIA agent gone bad who supplied explosives to Gaddafi and helped train his terrorists. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Now, Were you surprised that someone like Quintero would show up in this enterprise?
Yes,
that
sir.
he
I
would be
was.
your first call?
Yes, sir. It was never advised before of his presence in this operation.
Now, you testified further that for about the next 6 months you worked with Secord and Company, Quintero and the others, and you began to develop concerns about the operation. Yesterday you talked about examples of overcharging, overpricing, the $3 grenades for which the Contras were charged $9 apiece. You mentioned that GAD had overcharged in connection with the building of a runway in a neighboring country. Were there other examples of overcharging as well, of profiteering?
Well, sir, that was what I heard that from actually from Mr. Quintero about the fact that the people down in the other neighboring country that were working there.
Yes, but were there other examples of this kind of overcharging or profiteering that came to your attention?
Well, people will say in the program of their own people that a lot of the equipment that they were buying, they thought it was pretty high priced.
All right, sir.
But
now,
I didn't have anything to do with the purchasing of it, or didn't see any receipt. Of course, they would not show me any receipt of it, so it was just hearsay for them.
Senator Tribble, may I
conversation-
interrupt you just a moment?
Please.
Excuse me, just to announce that a vote is in progress in the Senate, and that's the reason for the senators leaving. And the bells are now ringing for a vote in the House, so we may have to declare a recess here in a few minutes. But
Mr.
Senator,
Chair?
why don't you proceed if it's
Thank you,
convenient
Mr.
for
Chairman.
you?
I will continue and complete my
All right.
colloquy with Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, in your conversation with Colonel Gregg on August 8th, 1986, Gregg's notes indicate that you said the following: Dick Gadd purchases things, got first Caribou, big profit, Klein's is getting money from, then deleted, or whatever, buying things at great profit. What was the basis for those comments to Colonel Gregg?
Mr. Gregg.
Yes, Mr. Gregg, rather.
Well, I guess I mentioned to him, sir, that an instant we were buying communication equipment that I saw on that paper, repeaters and other radios for the program down there. Before we received the repeater, we were told that the funding had gone out. It had been finished. We were only allowed something like $30,000, and we learned from the individual who was providing that there's only being spent $15,000 in it. But apparently in the books of Mr. Gadd, all $30,000 were already spent. So somehow the prices went, actual expenditure of $15 went to $40,000 or $30,000 in there, and eventually we got at the very end of this the repeater down there that was actually never used.
Now, what about this first Caribou? You said there was a big profit. Did someone make a lot of money on that as well?
There were comments by some of the crew members that the Caribou have cost ostensibly more, 3 times more that it usually will cost.
All right,
that
so
type
now
of aircraft. But
let me move to another area to make the same point about profiteering. To the best of your knowledge, what was the pay of the pilots?
Well, as I understand from them, it was $3,000 a month. I never saw any paper, but what they told, and I think Hasenfuss testified when he was released and when he was down there, that his salary and all of the other pilots was $3,000 a month.
Your understanding was then that they were paid $3,000 a month.
$3,000 a month plus a bonus for every flight that they make inside the country.
And that was $700 a flight.
700. At the beginning, it was 700 per pilot and 450 for the crews, and then they discussed that they were all taking the same risk at the same time, so they decided to pay equal to all of them.
All right, sir. Now let me refer you to the last exhibit in your book, which is marked Exhibit FIR 6, which is a billing to Lake Resources. Do you have any explanation why the billings to Lake Resources indicate a daily rate of $450, which adds up to about $13,500 a month?
No, sir, I have no explanation, but the figures 400, 450 are quite similar to the situation with the 2 people that were working in the South Country. But I have no...
But this indicates, does it not, a substantial overcharging, that they were being charged
If what
far in excess to what the
was
pilots
correct for
received.
3,000, of course, it's tremendous overcharge on that.
All right, sir. Now let's move on to another subject. You found also examples of old ammunition being delivered to the Contras. For example, 81 millimeter rounds built in the early 50s, and you expressed concern about that, did you not?
Yes, sir, that was the main concern, that the 81 millimeter round, the boxes said that they would build they were making in 1954, So we had a concern of going through all the trouble of delivering this and then misfiring it. So we did test fire about 18 rounds of the 81 millimeter. And the other item that we did fire was the AK-21 submachine gun machine gun that is belted. And not because it was in bad shape, because the FDM people didn't know whether the appropriate belt was put on into it or not. And it did work fine. We need not test fire any other unit.
I understand, Mr. Rodriguez, that when you test fire them, they seem to operate correctly. But isn't it a fact that Mr. Bermudez, who was a commander of the Democratic Resistance, told you later that this ammunition did not perform well in the field, that it misfired?
Yes, sir. When I was, after my operation, Mr. Bermudez visited me in my house in Miami.
I don't want to cut you off, but my time is short. And answer if you feel it's important, but I don't think the circumstances, the place of that conversation is as important as the subject. He did tell you that, did he not?
Yes, sir. He did a lot of misfire.
All right, sir. Now,
different items.
Now, by the way, yesterday we heard from Colonel Dunton, and Colonel Dunton said on another matter that he complained that you had demanded control of the fuel fund. Now, why did you demand control of the fuel fund? Isn't it true that one of Mr. Dunton's lieutenants, a fellow named DeGaray, had attempted to bribe a public official in your host country, and it was because of your outrage, because of that incident, that you demanded to control these funds?
May I explain the incident, sir?
I want you to.
Yes, sir. I have told them that anything they had to do in there have to go through me to be able to keep it very clear. When I took a vacation to come to Miami, Mr. DeGaray requested a meeting with the chief friend of mine in the area, and he told the officer that it was a matter that he had to discuss with him personally. He went there accompanied by one of the pilots, and when he got to my friend's desk, he dropped on his desk $15,000 in cash and told him that this was going to be for the fuel fund. I think this infuriated my friend because he didn't know how to do that, and he didn't do business like that. He told Mr. DeGaray to pick up that money, that he was not an accountant, to take it to the accountant of the local base and to get a receipt for the money that he was turning in for the fuel account that we were opening. From there on, I took control of the account and made sure that every receipt was given to the control officer, and then kept a very precise expenditure with balances and everything that I submitted to the committee for the time that I was down there, sir.
Fine. Thank you, sir. Now, let me ask you this. What did all this tell you about Mr. Secord and his lieutenants? Overcharging, delivery of old ammunition, attempt to bribe a public official in the host country. What did that tell you, if anything, about the people you were doing business with?
I wasn't very confident with the type of operation that was being run down there, sir.
In fact, it's true, is it not, that you told Colonel North and others that this was the old Wilson gang in business once again?
Yes, sir.
Now, you have testified that Mr. Quintero was associated with Mr. Wilson and Gaddafi. What about Mr. Klein's?
Well, Mr. Quintero was very closely associated with Mr. Klein. They were very close friends. Like I used to be a long time ago.
Now, Mr. Klein's was also active in the support of Gaddafi as well, was he not, through Mr. Wilson?
Yes, they were very close to Wilson.
Isn't it a fact that he hired pilots for Gaddafi when he worked for Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Now, did Mr. Klein's tell you that General Secord and Mr. Wilson had also been business partners?
At one point in time, sir, which I mentioned, I want to clarify that because I don't like to say things that I do not have proof. But I believe Mr. Ballan wanted to know very strongly why did I feel uncomfortable with Mr. Secord and why did I wanted to leave the project. I had to have a reason for it. And I explained to him very clearly that I had no proof or nothing, but at one point in time, Mr. Klein mentioned that General Secord was a partner of him with 20 or 25% in the oil company back in 1979.
In EDSCO?
Well, he didn't mention EDSCO at the time.
But a partner with Mr. Wilson, 25%?
Yes, sir.
All right, sir. Now let me move on to Colonel Fred Dunton. You all didn't get along very well.
No, sir.
Is that correct?
It's obvious by his testimony.
That's right. Mr. Dunton yesterday talked about his efforts to honor the neutrality law, that he had an opinion in hand. That doesn't square with your own recollection of the facts. Tell us, if you will, what did Colonel Dutton tell his associates about U.S. neutrality laws?
Well, the first time that I actually did not became to dislike the individual was he arrived down there. He was carrying the Neutrality Act in his hand. He did mention the fact that for them to be legal, I guess he counted me as one of the group at the time. For them to be legal, first of all, they could not, like he said here, drop anybody from the aircraft, but they had to compromise American officials in it to be legal, to be receiving information from the military, and he wanted to get a Steele more involved in it and as the ambassador if possible. And that way they would be legal in the operation.
So Colonel Dutton, contrary to his testimony yesterday, told his associates that they should try to compromise U.S. officials and get them more involved in these activities. Is that right?
He mentioned that at the base, sir.
Now, did Dutton also tell you what his long-term goal was in terms of this operation? Did you also hear about that from the pilots?
Well, he believed that after the approval by Congress of the aid to the Contras, he believed that the operation will continue and they will get a participation in supporting the South Front. I believe it was sort of on a rented basis with the agents.
In fact, you told Colonel Gregg, did you not, that he had constructed a paper organization to sell the CIA?
Yes, sir. I told Mr. Gregg that I was very concerned with that, but at the same time there were a lot of good pilots in there, and instead of the agency taking an operation with directors on it, they could very well pick up pilot from that and use it because they were very good pilots, a lot of them.
Now, moving on April 20th, 1986, you met with Colonel North, Secord, Bermudez, and others down in this Central American country. And you said yesterday at that time that Bermudez, the head of the FDN, said in very strong terms that he was concerned about the aircraft. He didn't like the aircraft. He was concerned about their speed, about their condition, about their limited capacity to carry goods. What was Colonel North's response to that?
Well, he said that these are the aircraft that he received as donation, that if he had the money, he would buy better aircraft, and I guess he mentioned the C-130. He mentioned it to him that he will prove to them that it will work, that he had pilot trained, that he had been used successfully in other parts of the world.
So he told you he didn't have any money, didn't he?
Yes, sir. He said he didn't handle any money, it was strictly donations.
Now, were you surprised to learn later that Colonel North had not told you the truth? That in fact he had a whole lot of money and that these were not donations?
Yes, sir.
How do you feel today, knowing that people were putting their lives on the line, that you were struggling day in and day out to hold this fragile operation together, and at that time Colonel North told you that he had no money, and yet there were millions of dollars socked away in secret Swiss bank accounts?
It infuriated a lot of people that believe strongly in this cause and in democracy, sir.
Now, you also testified, did you not, that you delivered false end-user certificates that day to this company of individuals, pursuant to Quintera's request?
Yes, sir.
But you didn't say who you gave those to. Who did you hand those to?
General Secord, sir.
General Secord.
Yes, sir.
And you've asked for those to be returned because they haven't been used.
Yes, after about a month and a half, we requested when were they coming, and we were told that the deal did not come through, and I know a certificate like that floating around is important, especially if you get in the wrong hands, and I strongly request that they will be returned to the signatory.
Have they been returned?
No, sir.
Now people are probably wondering why this fascination with end-user certificates, but they have tremendous value, do they not? They
Yes, sir.
control where very lethal weapons go.
Yes, sir.
Now, you returned to Central America after that meeting, and on June 23rd, you were called by Quintera to Washington to meet again with North and Dutton. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Now, at that time, you told North, according to your testimony, about the Wilson connection and about overcharging.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I see the red light, but with your permission, I'd like to go on for a couple more moments.
Senator may continue.
Thank you very much. Especially in view of the fact that all my colleagues have departed, I'll carry on. You told North at that time about Wilson overcharging, about the Wilson connection, rather, and about overcharging. Did you not?
The people that were connected with Wilson in the past, yes.
And you testified yesterday that you told him that this was worse than Watergate and that it was going to destroy the president. Did you not?
Yes, sir.
Now, what was North's response?
What he said basically was, Mr. Klein is a patriot. He's not buying anything. He's just helping me in the transportation of equipment.
He told you that those allegations were not true.
That's all that he said, and at that point in time, I guess I was wasting my time there, and I left.
Okay, now, do you think Klein's or Gadd or DeGaray or Secord or Contra are patriots, Mr. Rodriguez?
Sir, for me, it's very hard to emit an opinion when people are down. I have never been known for doing that. I guess it will come very clear when these testimonies are over, the merit of everybody had in this process. And I leave it to you and to the American people to judge for themselves.
That's a very fair statement, and I applaud your good intentions. Were you surprised that Colonel North was working with these kinds of people, given all the things you've told us today?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I believe there was an article in the New York Times that at the very end read, by all means, Colonel North was running this network, and could he be that dumb? That was the end of the article in the New York Times.
How could he be that dumb?
How could he be that dumb of using these people? I think that was the end of the article in the New York magazine some time ago.
Now, during this meeting, you also indicated Colonel North was watching the debate on the Contra aide on television. Is that
Yes,
correct? And you indicated a statement that he made yesterday. How would you characterize Colonel North's attitude toward Congress?
Well, critical. I will not repeat the statement because my wife already told me that I shouldn't have said the last word of it, but I was asked here to do it.
Well, you said something to the effect, and I sanitize it for television and for the record, that these folks want to get me, but I'm safe because the old man loves me.
Yep.
Or something like that.
Or a part of his body, yes, sir.
Now, what did you believe he meant when he said the old man? Who did he mean?
Sir, it could be the president.
Now, let me ask you this.
But I think it's kind of disrespectful in this,
Did-
that type of a statement.
What did you make of that statement? I mean, did you believe that statement, or was this sort of self-serving hype on the part of Colonel North?
Well, what I have seen here before, sir, is due to a lot of dramatic type of a statement, and probably that was one of them. Not very nice, but one of them.
Now, one final point, and I don't want to impose too heavily on the chairman. He's been very gracious, and I will run to vote. You indicated that during July and August of '86, the operation came to a standstill. That Contra said the operation was going to be terminated, nobody was going to be paid. You talked about the kind of the confrontation over the plane. You went out and told the pilots that, or asked them if they would fly for free, and they agreed to do so.
Yes, sir.
Now, why do you believe the operation was terminated?
He told me, black and white.
Well, tell us.
Well, when I arrived in there, first of all, I have been told I have stolen the plane, and he specifically told me that that plane had to be refueled and returned. And he had a lot of spare parts on board that were for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters to repair their planes. I saw no reason why to return the plane unless the operation was terminated, because that was a material that was badly needed down there, and I expressed it so to him. So he told me that's exactly the case. This thing is finished and done. I'll be down there in 3 days to close on all the houses and tell the pilots on the behalf of their principals that they no longer have the authority to fly those aircraft. If they do, will be on their own.
And Mr. Rodriguez, time is short, and I don't want you to go through
Yes.
the details of those transactions again. You talked about those yesterday. My question is this: why do you believe they attempted to terminate the operation?
Well, sir,
In your testimony, in your transcript, you said they had decided they were not going to get the CIA contract. They were trying to move everything out, and I was not going to let them steal it.
yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That was your judgment at the time?
Yes, sir.
And that is your judgment today?
Yes, sir.
You indicated also that because you stood them down, the resupply continued. But then you said you put Contra guards on board the aircraft to make sure they were not stolen.
Yes, sir.
And what you didn't say yesterday was who was going to try to steal them.
Who? Can you say that again? Can you ask the question again?
Yes, sir. The question is, who are you concerned about trying to steal those aircraft?
Well, sir, I was concerned that they would receive orders from the owner, which is General Secor, and take the airplane somewhere else.
Precisely. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Welcome, sir.
Congressman Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sure that most of the questions have already been asked while I've been over voting, so I don't want to just repeat questions that have been asked before, but I've observed you during your testimony, read your deposition, and it appears to me that you were extremely concerned about the people on the ground down there that were actually involved in this conflict, that you were concerned about their welfare.
Yes, sir.
About the equipment that they were using, about the fact that their lives were constantly placed in danger in ill-equipped old aircraft. Is that generally correct?
Yes, sir.
And I also understand that with your many years of experience in the CIA and your familiarity with the people there, having gained their confidence, being the liaison person down there for Colonel North and that operation, that you commenced to see the personalities that were running the supply operation, and it gave you great concern, did it
Yes,
not?
sir.
Gave you great concern because you knew from your past experience that Quintero, that some of the Wilson crew might very well take advantage of the situation and make some money. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you thought the local people were simply getting, the troops were getting ripped off, and you felt obligated to try to stop it, didn't you?
Yes, sir. I felt responsible that they were there.
Did you ever work for Mr. Wilson or with Mr. Wilson yourself?
No, sir.
You never did. So you're...
I met him, but I never worked with him.
I see. And you really only had two contacts within the U.S. government in high places in which to express your dissatisfaction, your concerns, and that was Colonel North. And you did express those concerns to him.
Yes, sir.
And your other high source was the Vice President's office.
Yes,
and
sir.
you did express your concerns to Mr. Gregg, isn't that correctly?
Yes, when I felt I could do that.
Okay. And as you had the opportunity to talk with the Vice President, apparently you did not feel that you ought to talk about this directly with him. Is that correct?
Well, the meetings that I was with the Vice President, the first one, this thing was not even taking place. The second one was just to brief him on my operation on the helicopter, and I didn't mention anything to him at all on this.
It just seemed to me that this was the one opportunity that you would have to really express your concerns to the Vice President himself, and you didn't follow through on that, and I'm wondering why you didn't.
Sir, going in retrospective and looking back, the main reason I didn't express it to the Vice President or to Mr. Gregg before, I was very concerned with the aid to these people, and if it was known to everybody, the people that they were using, it would be a big scandal, which it is partially now, and I didn't want to be the one to start the ball rolling on that effect.
You didn't want to bring down another Watergate.
I didn't want to hurt the Contra program at that time, sir. I just wish that that period of time will go by and that the agency will take over the program and start helping the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, and it would have been much better for the country. That would have happened.
Okay. You In your observation of what was occurring, it was obvious that there was a lot of infighting with the arms dealers and a great deal of competition for the sale of arms. Isn't that correct?
Well, sir, I was down there. I continued to do my flying operation, so I was really not that much aware of all of these that have come up now.
Well, with your previous acquaintance with Mr. Klein's, your previous knowledge of Mr. Martin, Mr. Quintero, all of those people were interested at some point, in Mr. Gadd, in making money, were they not?
Obviously, but what I have seen here, sir.
That was one of their primary purposes for being there, was to make a little money on the sale of arms, wasn't it? All of them.
It's obvious.
That was obvious?
Well, it's obvious, but what I have seen here, sir. What I heard here.
Their number one objective was to make money, wasn't it?
Sir, it was my job down there was completely different. It had nothing to do with any of those buying or selling. I got to learn that gradually through the time that I was there. And before all of that, I even tried to leave the program because I wasn't happy with it.
And various arms merchants was trying to take the trade away from the other. Isn't that true?
Well, that's what come out now. See, at that time when you are in that area and you're trying to fly what I was there for, my helicopter concept, and at the same time helping these people, I didn't have that much time to listen and to hear all of this thing that is happening and coming up here now. So I really, see, once we are here and this thing already happened, it takes a different perspective. At that point, it was not as important the fact of everything that was going on, because we didn't know everything that was going on. Now we can aware of a much broader picture that we didn't have there, so you have to put me in that concept when I was down there.
Well, looking back now, with what you know now, isn't it rather obvious that there was a great deal of competition amongst the various arms dealers?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And that each of them were trying to cut the other out and get a piece of the action for themselves?
That got apparent that here.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
It is apparent that here.
It's apparent that that is
Yeah.
correct. You indicated that you had been told that this was a private operation.
Yes, sir.
But a private operation directed and controlled out of Colonel North's office?
Yes, sir.
In the White House, or the old executive office building?
Yes, sir.
Sort of difficult, I would imagine, to separate one's private duties and one's official duties when it is being conducted out of the office in the old executive office building, though, isn't it?
Well, Colonel North was doing it,
He was doing it.
obviously.
If it was entirely a private operation, I could hardly see how there could be a Watergate situation, why everyone would be so disturbed if it was entirely a private operation. Obviously, the government was directly connected, weren't they?
Well, sir, my idea of that was, when I mentioned that expression to the Colonel, was knowing the fact of all the publicity that the Wilson case had taken, and the mere fact to have those people connected with an official, like you say, in the old executive office building, whose responsibility, one of them was anti-terrorism, and some of the people were involved with Gaddafi, which is a terrorist. It was my expression that came to my mind, not with any other thing in mind that would reflect any other type of opinion.
What you're really saying, as I understand your testimony and looking back on it, the motive of Colonel North was good in that he was a fighter against communism.
Yes, sir, he got involved probably with.
But that the motive of the people that was operating the entity for him or whomever, including Klein's and the people that General Secord employed, their motive was not necessarily to fight communism, but to make a buck, wasn't it?
What I expressed, sir, here before was that even if their motives were good, I think he had a poor judgment in using these people, that for the mere fact of their involvement and the books of Peter Mass and other things that have come out, it will tarnish the operation itself, even if all what they did were good. In my opinion, it was sort of a bad judgment to use that type of individual in this operation. If it turns out later on the other things, that's another byproduct of the problem.
I know nothing about hand grenades and the cost of them, but I was somewhat interested in the $3 price versus the $9 price. Is that about the going price for a hand grenade, $3 or $4?
I don't know, sir. I never bought one. I just heard that one.
Does that sound in the ballpark to you? $3, $4?
I have no idea. But if somebody can sell it for $3, I think that's a good price when you compare the other for $9.
But if you can sell it for $9, you can make a little money, and somebody was doing that, in your opinion.
Well, that's what I heard.
I understand that's what you heard, but looking back on it, obviously the profit motive was there with all of these people.
Yes, sir.
Isn't
Instead
that-
of mark up a 3 or 30%, and forgot another zero there.
And that disturbed you because you didn't think that the people that were on the ground were getting a fair shake as far as the equipment and
Well, sir,
the things that they needed.
I was hurt because I thought with that same amount of money, instead of having 100,000 hand grenades, those people could have 250,000 hand grenades. That will help them tremendously.
At the time you talked with Mr. Gregg and gave him this information, at that point you had decided to cease all activity, is that right?
To what, sir?
You had decided to quit the operation. Was that the time the ambassador came in and said good things about you?
No, sir. That
was a different-
That was after. When the incident with the ambassador was, as I said, on May the 1st.
So you feel like you did everything that you could. You reported the perceived corruption and so forth to both Colonel North and to the Vice President's office, isn't that correct? And that's the only two people you knew to report it to, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We have completed questions by the principal questioners. Now we turn to other members under the 5-minute rule. Chairman Inouye.
Senator Hatch.
Chairman, Mr. Rodriguez, I want to thank you for being here, and I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate the service you've tried to render to your country through all these years and to the people in Central America as well as elsewhere. Now, regarding your testimony that $3 grenades were being marked up to $9 for sale to the Contras, is it correct to say that you have no personal independent knowledge of the details of what was actually charged or what the markup actually was? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. That's what I was told, and
You were just told that?
yes, sir.
Okay. Your only knowledge, it seems to me, from what I've heard, came from Mario Delamico. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And who also was in the arms business with Ron Martin, and who was a competitor of Klein's and Secord in 1984 and 85. Is that true? Is he the only person who told you that?
That's what it looks like, and as I understood, sir, they had that manifest of that and was showing to Mr. Calero.
Okay. In fact, did you know that Delamico and Ron Martin were very much in the business of selling arms for profit to the extent of opening up what has been called an arms supermarket in Central America, sort of a cash and carry operation. Were you
Yes,
aware
sir.
of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it was only from Mr. Delamico that you were told of the grenade prices. Am I correct there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You didn't attempt to independently investigate these prices that were charged, did you? Or did you have any opportunity to independently investigate that?
No, sir.
Okay. In fact, when Mr. Delamico told you about these grenade prices, it was at least several months after the sales were made. Is that correct?
At the time, he didn't know what time he was
You don't
talking
know.
about. He just
Okay.
mentioned it as like a casual conversation. He mentioned that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rodriguez, just so the record is clear, did you ever speak directly to the Vice President really about the resupply operation
No,
or
sir.
anything else pertaining to the Contras?
No, sir.
Never once to Vice
Never
President
once.
Bush. How about the President? Did you ever speak to the President?
I don't have the honor of knowing the president, sir.
All right. Now, do you have any personal knowledge as to what the President knew or didn't know about the details of the resupply operation?
No, sir. I was never mentioned the president's name at all by
So
anybody.
you've never
in
even
this
heard any
operation.
rumors about it then?
Sir?
You have not even heard rumors about it then?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rodriguez, I just want you to know, as I said at the beginning of this, that I admire you and your dedication. I think you have a very impressive background. You've gone through a lot for your country, and as I understand it, you've spent most of your adult life fighting against communism and government communist aggression. Now, despite what may have been some procedural errors and a wrongful process here, which I think almost anybody has to admit was wrong, it seems to me that you're still just as strongly in opposition of the Sandinista government and what they're trying to do as you were at the beginning. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you have testified that you did not trust General Secord and Thomas Kleins because of their prior association with Edwin Wilson. Now, did you have any direct evidence of wrongdoing on their part or only a suspicion of guilt based on association?
No, I have nothing specific.
So it's just basically a suspicion. You didn't like what went on, and you basically didn't. You basically had heard about Edwin Wilson and that at least Kleins had done business with Edwin Wilson. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Now, one thing that I was interested in Senator Tribble's line of questioning because he brought out that there were millions of dollars in a Swiss bank account that weren't sent over to the Contras. And I find that intriguing and very interesting because at the outset of this investigation, everybody was outraged that there might have been a diversion of funds to the Contras. And I have to personally say that the fact that there was certainly an impropriety. And it may, certainly under certain people's arguments, even have been illegal. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, all of a sudden, it seems that the new outrage is that the diversion didn't take place in a bigger amount of money.
Yes.
Well, as I listened to Secord, he seemed to indicate that he was going to give it to them, but he was concerned about making sure all the bills were paid, any deaths were reimbursed, and any other problems, insurance and otherwise, were taken care of before he transferred the monies. Now, whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but I think you've heard that as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Well, again, I just want to thank you for being here. I think you've acquitted yourself well. I respect you and respect what you've tried to do.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rodino.
Thank you very much. Here you go. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez.
Morning, sir.
Mr. Rodriguez, I too have noted you've had a distinguished record in fighting communism, and of course we all applaud this. We, however, are aware of the fact that there came a time when, notwithstanding the fact that there were individuals who feel very much like you do about fighting communism, and in this case fighting in support of the Contras, you became very, very concerned about the kind of operations that were being conducted, and you made it a point to come on up to Washington to see Mr. Gregg. Is that correct?
Well, after I was accused of stealing that aircraft, yes, sir.
But you did make a point to come all the way up to Washington to see him.
That point, sir.
And you laid out quite a case to Mr. Gregg about some of the things you considered as wrongdoing, the amount of money that was being charged for certain ammunition, certain weapons, and the fact that there was a Mr. Kleins involved, and many of these things that gave you a great deal of concern. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. He was very surprised to hear about it.
Now, you came up there to see Mr. Gregg in order to communicate with him so that he, in turn, might communicate this to the Vice President?
No, sir.
You expected that Mr. Gregg was going to resolve the question for you?
I wanted him to know what the problem was at that point in time. I thought that it was known to the public, it will hurt the administration, and I didn't expect him to tell the Vice President, but I think he did call for a meeting for the appropriate individuals in the State Department and agency and others to voice my concern about it.
Well, did
because
you
I don't think it was the business of the Vice President's office to be involved in that, sir.
You didn't what, please? I didn't hear the last
I don't
part.
believe it was the Vice President's office business to be involved in that, but I think that he would pass on the...
Why wouldn't you consider it the responsibility of the Vice President, who serves as the second chief second executive in command in this country to know what was going on in that administration.
Mr. Rodino, they were not involved as far as I knew in all of this. And at the same time, I think the Vice President have a lot of more important things to do than be involved in something of this matter. And I strongly believe that today.
Well, did you expect Mr. Gregg to resolve the question for you? Did you expect him to do something about what you had communicated to him?
Well, the main reason why I went up there, if you have read the testimony, sir, it was because Mr. Norris went to see him and told him that there was a plane down there, and he wanted to see if he could use his influence for me to release it, that I could do that, without explaining more detail to Mr. Gregg. And because of that, I came up to clarify the situation, sir.
When was it that you went to see Mr. North? Was it before or afterwards?
Mr. Owen,
Mr. North, Colonel North.
25th of June is when we had that meeting with him.
When was that meeting? Prior to your meeting with Craig or following?
The meeting with Norris was before I went to see Mr. Gregg.
Well, you had heard from Colonel North when you discussed the matter with him and expressed your disappointment then as well. And you had heard Colonel North, who at that time was, as you describe in your deposition, viewing the television, and there was a debate going on concerning the Contra issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Colonel North's words, according to you, that he said that some of those bastards were out to get him, but he was safe because the old man was going to look after his ass. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct.
Let me ask, first of all, I assume that you believed, and if you don't, just tell me that the old man that Colonel North referred to was the president?
Well, I think it's everybody's belief of that, say it in those terms. But it's an assumption of all of us. He
Let
never
me
said he was
ask
the
you, and
president.
this is, of course, only probing, why do you think Colonel North would make such a statement? Was it that he felt that he'd be safe from anything? Colonel North could do most anything that he wanted to do, and the president would just say, fine, that's fine, Colonel.
I will not speculate on that. You could ask that to Colonel Norris when he appeared here, sir. He will give you a better explanation than mine.
All right, let me go on to something else. That's appropriate. After all, you don't know what Colonel North had in mind. I thought that having listened to what he had to say and tone of conversation, that you might have drawn your own conclusion. But let me ask you this. You did say, and you've heard it repeated, that you described this, and these were your words, this is worse than Watergate. Just what did you mean by that? I mean, you know, when we think of Watergate, we conjure up deception on the part of people high in the government. As a matter of fact, the president, circumvention of the law, abuse of authority. That's what we think about when we think about Watergate. What did you mean by it?
Well, sir, maybe being born in Cuba, I have a different perception of it. And I probably didn't realize by saying that you will be making implication of all that I didn't thought at the time. I just mentioned like
So you don't
any other
think
thing.
it's, you don't think
It
it's
didn't came to my
comparable?
mind the implication of that sort.
I
could
mean,
have-
at this time, you don't think so.
No, at that time either. I could have said anything. It's just the thing that came to my mind without any other thought about it, without any more implication or because he had any other thing in mind that I would relate and use Watergate specifically. I could have said another thing.
Well, my time is up. Thank you very much,
You're
Mr.
welcome, sir.
Rodriguez.
Senator Cohen.
Mr. Chairman, a few moments ago, it was suggested that Congress somehow is inconsistent in its outrage, and therefore that casts some doubt upon the credibility of Congress. The fact is that Congress was outraged that funds were improperly diverted for the benefit of the Contras. The Congress didn't want money to go to the Contras that came about as a result of a covert sale of U.S. assets. There was also outrage that those funds, not enough funds, were being diverted to the Contras in the sense that Congress didn't want private individuals to line their pockets at the expense of the Contras or anyone else as a result of the improper sale of those assets. And the heart of the matter, Mr. Chairman, is that the administration may have been engaged in forming a construction unit designed to dig a tunnel under the DMZ into Nicaragua, the DMZ being the United States Congress. And that's really the issue that we're trying to debate here, not whether or not Congress is consistent or inconsistent in its its application of outrage. Mr. Rodriguez, you mentioned yesterday the name of Ramon Medina. Who is Ramon Medina?
Ramon Medina is Luis Posada Carriles, a friend of mine, and you know the story that he escaped from a country.
I'm sorry?
Well, you know the story that he was an individual who escaped from the country. He was a man that I consider honorable, an individual that for one reason or another didn't have a proper legal procedure where he was, that during 10 years he had been waiting for a trial, that he was acquitted at one point in time, and without proving guilty of any way or form, he was still in jail for 10 years waiting, which would be outrageous in this country for any court to do that. And I helped him. I am the only responsible for him to be there, nobody else, and I don't regret what I did, sir.
The question was raised about Mr. Ron Martin. Were you ever paid or receive any benefit from Mr. Martin or his organization?
No, sir. I heard some allegation from Mr. Dutton to that effect, but it was not. I was also outraged to hear that they will have any doubt that I was passing information for the Abergan honey case, and not even Fidel Castro would believe that.
Well, let's talk about the Honey Abergan case. In your deposition, you indicated back in the spring of 1986 that a decision had been made as a result of that lawsuit here in Washington to have Colonel Dutton retire and take over the management of the operation.
Mm-hmm.
Whom did you hear that from?
The what?
How did you hear this? From whom did you hear this, that he was asked to retire, Colonel Dutton?
I heard him mention that down there from, I think it was Quintero, one of the pilots, that they were bringing him aboard and they were asking him to retire but it was just a comment. I didn't pay much attention to it.
When they say they are asking him to retire, who do you think that meant?
Colonel Secor.
Colonel Secor?
General Secor, excuse me.
General Secor is asking him to retire. But you didn't give it any thought beyond that?
No, not at all.
Did you ever, during the course of your activity in Central America, ever cooperate with either Honey or Abergan?
No, sir, I never even know who they are. They
Sure.
put in front of me, we don't even know how they look like.
Did you ever leak any information to them?
I don't think I will leak information to anybody which is against my cause.
Do you have any
They are
phone-
as communists, as in my belief, as the Nicaraguans are.
Did you have any phone conversations with them?
No, sir.
Did you confront Colonel North at that meeting in Washington when they suggested they had conversations, taped
They
conversations?
never suggested that to me, sir.
They never suggested that?
No, sir.
Colonel North never confronted you with the fact that you were suspected of leaking information to the opposition?
No, sir. He just told me that I was a security risk because I was talking up in telephone line. I did ask him to prove it, and I will sign any release from a U.S. agency, not only to him, but to make it public and prove to me that I was a security risk.
Well, he must have indicated to you that he had some evidence showing that you had been talking too much on the open phones.
That's the only thing that he said. He didn't say to whom or to what, or to what effect.
But he never offered to substantiate the allegation.
No, sir. I don't think he will ever believe that I would talk to Hani or Abergan.
Did you ever raise this issue with Mr. Gregg at a subsequent time, the fact that your credibility or your allegiance or loyalty was called into question?
It was never a matter of loyalty. It was a matter of security reasons as far as talking too much, but I don't know if I did or not, sir. I don't have any recollection of it. I might, but not of illegality.
Did either General Secord or Colonel Dutton suggest that you were trying to sabotage the operation and undermine the support of a Central American general?
They never told me, sir. I just found it here when he said it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. DeWine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for your testimony today and yesterday. Let me go back to your testimony this morning. You testified that while in your host country, in Central America, there was a Nicaraguan, and that Nicaraguan had been given false identity, had been sent into that host country, and had in fact been trained in Cuba. Is that correct?
That was not a Nicaraguan. That was a local from that place that went through Nicaragua.
All right. It was a local
working with the guerrilla in the country that I was.
in that host country then?
Right. He was a national of that country.
All right. And he had received his training in Cuba. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. And you were involved yourself in the actual interrogation?
Yes. He turned himself in with all his equipment. He was a special forces. And I participated in talking to the individual because I know Cuba. And get more details how they got into Havana, and he explained to us the whole details of how he was moved from our area through Nicaragua into Havana, and then from there to a training camp, and then back into his guerrilla operational area.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, just so the record is straight, could you tell us whether or not this guerrilla was trained in the high art of negotiations? Is that what he was trained to do, or was he trained to go in and kill people and cause problems in that country?
He was trained to be the most sophisticated, to kill people and sabotage, and he was what was called the special forces of the guerrilla. They are very highly trained for a special operation.
Mr. Rodriguez, you have lived a very unusual and very interesting life, and it's a life that is different or foreign to most of us, and I think virtually every other American. If I read your biography correctly and understood your testimony, and if my math is correct, you were involved before the Bay of Pigs, actually. You
That's
went
correct.
in, and I guess you were a teenager at that time, is that correct?
17 years old.
17. And since the time you were 17, you have been involved in fighting communists in Southeast Asia. You've done it in Latin America. You've done it in Central America. You've spent virtually your entire life doing that. Could you share with us what motivates a man to leave his family, to engage in an occupation like this that obviously does not have a great deal of financial reward connected with it? Why did you do that? Why have you done that?
Sir, I'll give you one example that I gave the committee, which is very hard, and a lot of people do not understand it. I'll give you an example. When I left Cuba, I had sort of a sister, and we grew together. And because of the Castro situation, we were separated. And after so many years, and we were very close because I am the only children in my family. Today, if I see her, I don't know what to tell her. It's very hard when you lose your country. You have to separate from the place that you love, where you were born. And you create, or in my case, I create tremendous desire that this will not happen anywhere else. And I still have the hope that someday will return to Cuba, to a free Havana. And I decided at that time that I will do everything in my power, not only to help other countries, but keep in mind that one day we'll go to a free Havana that will be to the best interest, not to us also, but to your country, our country. I lost a lot of people in Cuba. When we went in with 35 in the infiltration team, 25 were captured, 15 were executed, and 10 were in prison, and they just left a few years ago, were allowed to leave the country. I was one of the lucky 10 that made it to the Venezuelan embassy, and if I was safe, I felt a responsibility to those who died for the same cause before, and I made up my mind to continue this fight until Cuba is free.
Well, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm sure everybody in this room shares your wish. I appreciate your testimony very much. I've got one last question in an area that I'm a little confused about. You testified, I believe, if I heard you correctly, that Mr. Dutton was going to compromise U.S. officials to get further protection under the Neutrality Act. Did I understand you correctly? Is that what you said? And if you did, could you elaborate on that?
I think he was taking a legalist position about it, and actually he inherited a problem when he was calling to join this operation. I feel sorry for the colonel to a point. He was taking out from the active duty, and he joined this situation, and he wanted to make sure that he was legal. And so the way apparently the lawyer explained it to him was that he needed certain factors to be legal, and that's what he pursued at that time.
But the term compromise, how are you using that term? Just so
Well, I say he was told that for him to be legal, he had received in every operation the approval of a U.S. government official. And if they, as civilians, institution, were working for the government project, it would be legal. And I didn't feel that he probably felt that the North alone will not make this operation legal. He will need people like Colonel Steele, the ambassador, and other officials to support the operation to feel comfortable and legal in it.
My time is up. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Senator Sarbanes.
Mr. Rodriguez, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to something that Colonel Dutton said in his deposition. I want to read what he said, and then
Yes, sir.
I'd like you to address it. The question put to him, what were your general impressions of Felix Rodriguez? And he responded, my initial impression was that he was influential both in San Salvador and with some very high, the vice president, since it didn't take him long to tell me about that. Question, you gained that impression from him, not the vice president. Answer, right. As it turned out, he became a major problem in the conduct of the operation. He interfered with the operation, the operational side of it. He wanted as much control of the money as he could. He wanted a $10,000 emergency fund that he himself could use. He wanted control over our fuel fund. He wanted to be the big man in charge. He did not want to work for somebody else. He also had asked for Xerox machines and refrigerators and all sorts of things that he was keeping down there in his room. And question, what did you consider were his motives for doing this? Answer, money. And I'd like you to just address those.
I thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer that, sir. The money about the $10,000 that we talk about it was the 17th of the month, and we didn't have the fund to pay the houses that we were responsible for down there because they were very late in giving the funds, and it's outrageous to us to know that there was so much money in the bank, and we were just there having to give excuses to a lot of people to be able to pay the houses that we were renting for these people late. There were times when the plane went out and they used the fund that were given to the houses project, which I did not manage, Mr. Medina managed, and they had to take it from us to take it in the plane when they paid the fuel in the South country. So I sent, and let me get you a message that I had prepared here. All right, sir, on the 17th of July of 1986, I sent message number 71 at 14:45 hours local from down there, and I sent it to let's see, let me get it right here, sir. And I sent it to Mr. Quintero in Miami, and it reads, expenses need right now, tel bill, house aid, spend $1,119 in telephone bill, second house spent $1,870.77 in telephone bills, the other house was another $1,000, telephone bill of house zero $693, salary for drivers and maids, gave the amounts over fuel and repairs, and everything was overdue now for 17 months. And I put on paragraph 3, there is no contingency fund in this amount. Please consider US $10,000, which will be used for out-of-country fuel, oil, or any repair expense. Also, if any accident or sickness with our personnel for legal or medical fee, so far we have been lucky. So they were using the fund that they gave it for the house's expenses for fuel sometime outside the country when they need it, and then we had the responsibility to pay the houses in the country. I didn't plan at any point in time. We used it as a person. I never did, and it was at the very end because we were getting a lot of calls from the owners of the houses that we were not paying our bills because they did not send it in time.
So you absolutely reject the view that your motives for doing this were money?
Absolutely, sir.
Do you think that Colonel Dutton and General Secord were in this enterprise for profit?
Sir, I think that the final outcome of these testimonies, and you have 10 times more facts than I do, will produce a judgment to that effect. I don't want, when people are down, like I said before, to pass judgment on them. I don't believe it is proper for me to do that.
But you suspected it at the time, and it was one reason you wanted to drop out of the operation, was it not?
Yes, sir.
Now, the other question I want to put to you is, and you may have answered it, I had to go to a roll call. Whose decision was it to place guards on the airplanes in order to assure that they were not taken away?
That was my decision, sir.
And you had the authority to put them on?
Well, I consulted with the Nicaraguan people, with the FDN, who's being resupplied, and we agreed they wanted to make sure also that they considered to be their planes because they was donated for them, and they wanted to make sure that nobody took it away. So it was a joint decision.
And did Colonel Dutton oppose that? I mean, what was his reaction to your placing armed guards on these planes?
I don't think we ever mentioned it to him. We just put a guard on board, and that was it.
You just went ahead and did it?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Corder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for being here again today. I've enjoyed your testimony very much. I find it quite ironic that some people are very, very interested and think it's germane to talk about a motive when the subject is money, but when it's the subject is commitment to principle, motive somehow is irrelevant to these proceedings. It's very germane and important to talk about motive as to what might have motivated Oliver North's statement about the old man, but what motivated him in the very beginning, with regard to his commitment to the Contras is somehow irrelevant. At least that's what I get from some of the discussions in the cloakroom around here. I think that motive is important not only with respect to money, but also with respect to your actions and some other individuals. You showed a flag not long ago. I'm not asking you to take it out. I don't think we need to do that. But you are not close to the microphone when you described it. Would you describe, number one, what color it was? I think we could all see that. But number two, what the symbols were on both sides of it, and therefore what its meaning is to you, and why you brought it?
Yes, sir. That's a red flag that was captured in one of the guerrilla camps in the area where I was in Central America. You have the name of the guerrilla groups supposedly nationalistic in the country, and it has on one side the emblem of the Soviet Union, which is what they fight for and they inspired them.
Where did you get that flag?
I captured that, sir, with local troops in one of my operations in helicopter on the 7th of November of 1985 in a place called Las Tablas in the country where I was.
In other words, you're saying that that was kind of tangible evidence of your knowledge that that movement indeed was a Marxist totalitarian movement that you were working against.
Yes, sir. There's no question in my mind.
We know clearly by your history, your commitment, as you indicated, to liberty and democracy, your concern about losing your own country to freedom, that you want to continue the fight for democracy and freedom. We understand that. Going back to motive again, however, in your work with insurgency groups or against them, in your work in Central America and Latin America, and you've spent a great deal of your life, you're somewhat of an expert in totalitarianism, its methods, its information, its tactics. Did you ever see any evidence of Nicaragua, Sandinistas, or Cuba, present-day Cuba, Marxist Cuba, involved in acts of drug smuggling or terrorism? And I'm just wondering whether, if so, that may not be motivating you as well.
Well, I have heard about it, sir, in the battlefield that I have been. That was not the case, you know, in the field itself. But of course, I have heard and I have seen proof of that type of situation, their involvement in the drugs. As a matter of fact, a long time ago, which has nothing to do with this, there was an individual in Miami that was called upon. I put in contact with authorities who was called by the Nicaraguan Comandante Ortega or one of his aide. His aide came to Guatemala and made a call from there and asking him to set up a bank in Panama to launder money because they thought they needed cash and that would be a good way to do it. And I put him in contact with authority. I don't know whatever happened after that.
Do you have any knowledge of whether the Sandinistas have been involved in terrorist activities in Puerto Rico?
No, sir. I have not been in my field. I hear about it, but I have no knowledge of that.
How about from your knowledge from talking to individuals in Central and South America, about the Sandinistas' involvement in insurgencies in Central and South America, and Mexico obviously is in North America, and Mexico as well.
There's no question about it, sir. They are.
Are they getting training from the Sandinista government, supplies, intelligence, communication equipment, that sort of thing? What type of help and assistance
Well, they're
are
mainly
they
in
getting?
conjunction with Cuba. They are getting all of this training and supply from.
From
most,
Cuba?
most of the rifles that we have captured down there have been traced back to the Vietnam time, and they are using the rifles that were abandoned in Vietnam through the route of the Soviet Union, Cuba, and Nicaragua to use it in the
And what
the areas.
finally, Mr. Rodriguez, my time is up. What is the relationship at the present time between the Sandinista Nicaraguans and Cuba?
It's one extension of the Soviet Union, both of them, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heflin.
In your relations with General Secord and Mr. Dutton, others connected with the airlift, was there ever any discussions that they made pertaining to any arms sale or their activity pertaining to arms sales to Iran?
No, sir.
Never, you never
Never at
heard
all.
it
I
mentioned
just learned it when it
whatsoever?
was in the news here, sir.
All right, so now the planes that were there and used in the resupply, I believe from what you've testified is that they flew during the daylight hours. Were they unable to fly at night, and if so, would it have been safer for the planes to have flown at night?
Sir, if they have the proper equipment, they could fly at night. I made an effort to buy the infrared equipment for them, and in those day flight time, we did drop it in. I gave some copies to the committee of the equipment I acquired to send it to them. It was approved that the first L-100 that dropped equipment in that area, that had the proper equipment, on the second time they did find the group and they make a very successful airdrop. Of course, this one had all the equipment on it.
So there were flights that were made at night?
If they had the proper equipment on board, of course. There's no consideration in this type of operation to do it in the daytime in an area where they have ground-to-air missiles, and it would be ridiculous unless you didn't have any type of good navigation equipment that you could not do it otherwise.
All right, so now, let me ask you, did you see the secret airstrip in a country adjacent to, did you see the secret airstrip in a country in Central America that supposedly was being used to refuel on flights that might be going over Nicaragua?
Can you repeat the question, sir? I didn't got that one.
I don't want to be disrespectful to you or to my native tongue, but I believe we need an interpreter. Well, the secret airstrip, do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes, sir.
All right, sir. Would you tell us whether that secret airstrip was paved?
No, sir. It's dirt.
Was it more than just a bulldozed strip of land where a plane could land?
Well, sir, the experience was that when they first tried to land there with a C-123, it got stuck. And it took about 3 days to get it out without all the equipment in it because it wasn't proper for that type of operation, in my opinion.
Well, do you think that there was any large sum of money spent on preparing that airstrip?
Well, after I saw the pictures that have been in the press, I will assume so, sir, but I have no direct knowledge of just what I read in the press being Udall, one of Mr. Secor's corporation from Panama, but I have no knowledge of that operation.
All right, sir. Now, you were a former member of the CIA, is that right, sir?
I was a former.
All right, so now, in the CIA, the director of covert activities, would it be unusual for the director of covert activities to come from other than the ranks, in other words, other than having someone who was a career CIA employee or agent?
I think it would be normally come from the ranks.
From the ranks.
Yes, sir.
Would it be unusual if he would come from the outside?
It would probably be unusual due to the experience required for that job, sir.
I believe that's so.
Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's an old saying, he who defines the argument has it half won, and I know there's a zeal among some to confine this inquiry to who did what and ignore why. And I just want to make the point that I think why some of these things were done contributes to a fuller understanding of who and what, and that the nonfeasance of Congress may well turn out to be every bit as important as the misfeasance or malfeasance of certain individuals. Now, I've never in my life appreciated the rules of evidence more than sitting through these hearings, watching witness after witness being asked to interpret the state of mind of somebody else and tell us what their motives were. We do that. I guess we transfer psychic powers to witnesses and assume they can do that. But as I say, my admiration for the rules of evidence are reinforced by some of the inquiry here. Now, Mr. Rodriguez, you participated in the Bay of Pigs fiasco.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to ask you what your impressions were of the effect on morale of the people who risked their lives, encouraged by the United States to go ahead and do this, and then when we pulled the rug on them, what did that do for their morale? Could you tell us?
Well, it's very hard, especially when there are people in jail and killed, and also the credibility of this country.
Our credibility as a nation was severely damaged,
right.
was it
Our
not?
only ally and the one that we trust and the only one that could prevent this thing from happening. We all know that the Soviet Union does provide a tremendous amount of help to their allies, and in a lot of cases, like in the case of Nicaragua, you talk to them, what they hear is just wait until we get a different administration, sweat this one out, and then we'll be in good shape. There's a lot of, I don't know if I went beyond my answering your question, but it's what I feel about it.
And those people who trusted us and went ashore ended up in jail, didn't they?
Yes, sir.
Those that were still alive. Some of them still over there in jail?
Yes, sir.
Now, you interrogated a captured guerrilla in this other country in Central America that you were working in.
One that turned himself in, and then two that were actually captured.
And you said he was trained in Cuba, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Well, of course, Che Guevara was trained in Cuba, and you interrogated him down in Bolivia, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
Were these people trained to negotiate or to shoot a gun?
They were people trained to take over these countries.
By negotiation or shooting a gun?
Well, they never go by they never win by negotiation, only by shooting a gun.
All right. Now, your concern, I take it, is that the cause of the Contras has been and is being disserved by cynical people whose motives may well not be, whose primary purpose may well not be resisting the projection of Soviet power once more in our hemisphere on the land bridge between Texas and the Panama Canal, but to make a fast buck. If indeed the Contras' cause is helped, that's okay, but their primary purpose is the cynical one of making some money. Now, I assume that is a great concern of yours. Now, given that, you still are committed and dedicated to the cause of the Contras, are you not?
Yes, sir.
You believe that the only chance democracy and freedom has in that little torn country of Nicaragua is to keep the military pressure on the Gestapo of the left that the Contras are willing and eager to do if only we will support them and not pull the rug on them. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir.
And that combined with a conviction that we're there to stay, that our support will persist, not change from month to month or from session to session, combined with economic pressure and political pressure from the Organization of American States, who may well develop some chutzpah because we're there and we're going to stay there. That will get rid of the Sandinistas as Somoza was toppled. Would that be your idea as well as mine?
I agree with you, sir, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boren.
Excuse me, Senator Boren, before you begin, the bells have rung for another vote in the House, so members of the House will be excusing themselves.
Who were flying the planes and the crews during the conduct of the operation?
No, sir, and the letter that appeared in one of the exhibits prove it.
Following along on what Senator Heflin asked you, you said that some of the planes were equipped with avionics that would enable them to fly at night, but I gather that many of the planes through much of the operation were not equipped with such avionics. Is that correct?
The avionics were all and very erratic, and the report they had a tremendous amount of error because they were very old.
And so that's what made it necessary very often, if you were going to have accurate drops, to have to take these extreme risks of making these drops in the daytime. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir. When they almost crashed at one time, it's because of the avionics. They were about 10 miles off the route south in that country where they almost hit, well, they did hit the trees on top of a mountain.
Would it have been very expensive to have put adequate modern avionics in those planes?
For the amount of money that existed, it would have been very cheap, in my opinion, sir.
What kind of dollars are we talking about?
I would say for planes, it would be probably under $100,000.
Under $100,000 to have
a good radar and good navigation.
And that would have greatly increased the safety of those, like Mr. Cooper and others who tragically lost their lives.
Yes, sir.
How did you feel when you heard General Secord testify that he and Mr. Hakeem in the principal account still had $1.5 million and I believe $6.5 million, according to the figures in his testimony, and other various accounts of the enterprise that were not being committed? How did you feel about that when you reflect on the lack of safety precautions that were being taken for the pilots? Did you have any reaction when you first learned that?
Yes, sir. I was surprised to hear that amount of money was available, and it hurt on how little we were receiving down there. And at the time, it was sort of, we're just getting this little by little. Our understanding was that it was coming from donation, and it didn't arrive this month, and it was very, very short on funds.
If you'd known that that amount of money was sitting in those accounts at the time that you were trying to get that equipment to make that operation safer, would it have made you angry at the time?
Yes, sir. And probably we would not have lost that plane that we did.
Let me ask, on reflection, of course, as Mr. Coors, Mr. O'Boyle, and others have testified here, they donated those planes, I think, to use Mr. Coors' exact words. I intended to give that plane to the freedom fighters and not to Dick Secord. I think that was an exact quotation. So in retrospect, we know that the donors intended to give the planes to the Contras and not to the Enterprise, as it's been called. Did the Mr. Rodriguez, could you tell us about the lapel insignia that you're wearing?
Just one on top, sir, the Intelligent Star for Valor from the CIA.
That is a declaration that the CIA presented to you for courageous behavior and service?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think none of us doubt your commitment and your commitment to the cause with which you have been involved for so long, and we appreciate that commitment very much. You had a very deep concern about the safety of those who were involved in this operation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you feel that sufficient attention was being given to the safety of those people who were flying the planes and the crews during the conduct of the operation?
No, sir, and the letter that appeared in one of the exhibits proved it.
Following along on what Senator Heflin asked you, you said that some of the planes were equipped with avionics that would enable them to fly at night, but I gather that many of the planes through much of the operation were not equipped with such avionics. Is that correct?
The avionics were old and very erratic, and the report they had a tremendous amount of error because they were very old.
And so that's what made it necessary very often, if you were going to have accurate drops, to have to take these extreme risks of making these drops in the daytime. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir. When they almost crashed at one time, it's because of the avionics. They were about 10 miles off the route south in that country where they almost hit, well, they did hit the trees on top of a mountain.
Would it have been very expensive to have put adequate modern avionics in those planes?
For the amount of money that existed, it would have been very cheap, in my opinion, sir.
What kind of dollars are we talking about?
I would say for planes, it would be probably under $100,000.
Under $100,000 to have
a good radar and good navigation.
And that would have greatly increased the safety of those like Mr. Cooper and others who tragically lost their lives.
Yes, sir.
How did you feel when you heard General Secord testify that he and Mr. Hakeem in the principal account still had $1.5 million and I believe $6.5 million, according to the figures in his testimony, and other various accounts of the enterprise that were not being committed? How did you feel about that when you reflect on the lack of safety precautions that were being taken for the pilots? Did you have any reaction when you first learned that?
Yes, sir. I was surprised to hear that that amount of money was available, and it hurt on how little we were receiving down there. And at the time, it was sort of, we're just getting this little by little. Our understanding was that it was coming from donation, and it didn't arrive this month, and it was very, very short on funds.
If you'd known that that amount of money was sitting in those accounts at the time that you were trying to get that equipment to make that operation safer, would it have made you angry at the time?
Yes, sir. And probably we would not have lost that plane that we did.
Let me ask, on reflection, of course, as Mr. Coors, Mr. O'Boyle, and others have testified here, they donated those planes. I think, to use Mr. Coors' exact words, I intended to give that plane to the freedom fighters and not to Dick Secord. I think that was an exact quotation. So in retrospect, we know that the donors intended to give the planes to the Contras and not to the Enterprise, as it's been called. Did the Contras at the time that the operation that was going on and during this time that you placed guards, did they themselves believe that these aircraft had been donated to them?
I explained that to them, sir. It was my belief that it was a donation for them, and that's the understanding that Bermudez and other people had down there.
So Bermudez was also concerned that they might lose the aircraft, which they felt really belonged to them?
Yes, sir. I spoke to him on the 27th of July. That was the only time I went to visit him, and we discussed it.
Did you discuss with him or other Contra leaders the placing of guards to make sure that the planes were not taken out of support for the Contras?
At that time that I talked to him, we already had placed the guard, and when I talked to Bermudez on the 27th of July to make sure to see if we could get their people to be trained in those aircraft. So when the time came for the agency to take over, they could continue to fly.
So Bermudez was in agreement with you that this action should be taken to make sure that the Contras got to keep the aircraft?
Yes, sir.
Do you know General Singlaub, or either personally or by reputation?
I have a high regard for General Singlaub. I met him once in the area where I was.
Based upon your knowledge of him and your general knowledge of the reputation of General Singlaub and your knowledge dealings with General Secord and his reputation, if you were going to be purchasing arms or doing business with either General Singlaub or General Secord in terms of trying to get maximum benefit to the Contras, which one of the two would you decide to do business with?
Always go for the one that give me two for the price of one.
And so, which individual would that be that you would want to do business with, General Secord or General Singlaub?
General Singlaub, sir.
Because you're convinced that he had a sincere commitment to the cause.
Yes, sir, and it was to the best interest of the Nicaraguan freedom fighter to receive as much as possible with the least amount of money available.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rudman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, you have in front of you an exhibit which is marked 6. It's on the, it's not in the book. It's right on the, no, it's not in the book, Mr. Rodriguez. It's right on the table in front of you.
All right.
That represents an invoice to Lake Resources Incorporated from East Incorporated. Let the record show that East Incorporated was a corporation formed by General Secord and his associate, Mr. Hakim, but nominally owned by Mr. Gadd. And Lake Resources is a Secord Hakim company. The reason I want to look at this exhibit with you is there seems to be some misunderstanding about why some members of this panel are very interested in how the money was used. What the point, of course, is that I think you understand, Mr. Rodriguez, is that when you privatize foreign policy, be it selling arms to Iran or helping the Contras through all these private sources, things go awry and the policies don't get executed, and in your situation, people that needed equipment didn't get it. So I want to go through this invoice with you because you've been talking about hand grenades, you didn't have personal knowledge. Here's some things you have personal knowledge of that will show, I think, vividly what some people in this panel are concerned about. If you turn to the first page of it, you'll notice that it is a billing called Second Billing Support, and there are some names on there: Bolton, Stroop, Smet, Smith, Wilson, Sawyer, Pinard, Harrington, McCullough, Hughes, and Von Haven. Did you know those people?
Yes, sir, some of them.
And they were pilots and handlers?
Yes, sir.
And do you happen to know what they were paid?
Sir, they never discussed that with me, but I think it's a matter of record that Hassenfeld said that he was paid $3,000 a month.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, the pay varied between $3,000 and $4,000 a month. Now, what was happening here is that Lake Resources, which had money from the diversion of the Iranian arms sale, as well as from other donations from other places, billed people at the rate of $450 a day. This bill was for Mr. Bolton for 31 days. If you look at it, at $450 for about $13,950. So they were billing that gentleman's time at around $14,000 a month, and he was getting paid about $3,000 a month. Is that correct?
If that was the case, yes, sir.
And in fact, the others were either pilots or freight handlers. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And this committee does have records to show that the pay was between $3,000 and $4,000 a month.
Yes,
now, if
sir.
you look at page 1 and page 2 and go through the entire 6 pages, you will find, will you not, Mr. Rodriguez, that these people were all being billed at $450 a day.
Yes, sir.
You know for a fact that they weren't getting paid that.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Well, not to the committee's fact either. Now, if
Right.
you look at the first page, you'll find the total bill is $100,000.
Yes, sir.
By my calculations, there's somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 worth of profit on that one invoice.
Yes, sir.
And we know that Mr. Gadd nominally worked for General Secord, although he was named as president of East. East didn't own those airplanes, though, did they, Mr. Rodriguez?
Pardon?
East Incorporated did not own the airplanes. Do you know who owned the airplanes?
Well, I understand General Secord was Udall Corporation.
That's correct. So even though East theoretically was set up, General Secord and Mr. Hakim didn't put the prime assets in that corporation. They were put in Udall Incorporated, and money was funneled from Lake down to East to pay for the expenses of planes owned by Udall, essentially all owned by Mr. Hakim and General Secord. Now,
Yes, sir.
I think that the position that I take here, Mr. Chairman, is that these witnesses want to come forward and say they were in this for patriotism and profit, to use Senator Tribble's words. That's fine, but I kind of get a little bit bewildered when people come up here and testify that they were just doing this for great patriotic reasons when the records are absolutely contrary. Now let's turn to the airplanes just for one moment. General Secord has become a columnist. He is now writing columns for national newspapers. This morning's Wall Street Journal, he accuses the committee of all sorts of outrages and says that we had proof positive that these airplanes were the Contras and that we had it before us. Why, again, did you find it necessary to take the extreme step of putting armed guards with automatic weapons on these flights, on these Udall Corporation airplanes? Would you tell me why again?
We had a strong feeling, sir, at a point in time when they decided that they could not continue with the operation, they will take it away with them. And it was our strong feeling that these belong and were donated for the Nicaraguan freedom fight.
So as a matter of fact, you discussed this with the Contra leaders,
Yes, sir.
and they felt that these assets belonged to them.
Well, when they had the meeting with Colonel Norris, he told them that these were donations. They took it as granted that this is donation for them, it belonged to them.
And in fact, the memorandum of diversion of Colonel Norris indicates clearly the intention was to divert money to the Contras, right or wrong.
Right, sir.
And you had to put armed guards on these aircraft because, quite frankly, you were afraid they'd be stolen, to put it in plain words. Am I correct?
What, sir?
That they would be stolen
Yes, sir.
from the Contras who they belonged to.
Yes, sir.
So they were not only arms dealers, but they were making $50,000, $60,000 on people who were risking their lives, so they were arms dealers, and they were also flesh peddlers, were they not, Mr. Rodriguez?
That's what it looks like with this paper, sir.
Thank you.
Senator McClure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a great deal of respect for Senator Rudman, but I'm a little puzzled by the characterization on this last invoice because I too can read the invoice, but I don't know what period of time it covers. It says for a period ending, and I don't know how much these people flew nor what days they flew. I don't know what the other overhead was or how much there was, so the inference that was made may be accurate, but I can't read it from this invoice.
Well, if the Senator would yield, I would
I'd be
simply
happy
say
to yield.
they're billing for a certain number of days. They're not showing any other expenses. That's my
Well,
only
I
point.
understand that, but if they're flying 3 days a month and getting paid $3,000 a month, then they're getting paid more than they were recompensed for. And I'm not suggesting that that's a fact. I'm just saying I can't tell from the invoice whether or not it is a fact. It seems to me we've had a great deal of conviction by indirection in some of the testimony before us. We've had a lot of testimony about advice or contact with station chiefs in Central American countries, with State Department personnel in Central American countries, with military commander in the region, as though that were illegal, when I don't find anything in the record that indicates that's illegal. And yet a lot of the questioning has been along the line that to make the statement proves its illegality. And I don't see that either on the record. It may well be true, but that record has not yet been made, in my opinion. But Mr. Rodriguez, let me ask you this question. You've never spoken to the President about the Contra cause, have you?
I never met the President, sir.
Do you have any doubt of his support for the Contras?
No, sir, that have been expressed publicly by him on TV.
So you have seen the statements that he has made,
Yes, sir.
or reports of statements that he has made that indicate his support for the Contras.
Yes, sir.
And that support has been constant through this entire period, regardless of what the Congress may or may not have done during that period of time. And that, as a matter of fact, parallels your own views, does it not?
Yes, sir.
You not only agree with the President, I suspect you applaud him for the statements he's
Absolutely,
made.
sir.
And that's in spite of the fact that you've never seen him personally and or talked to him personally about it. Nevertheless, you're satisfied that his aims and yours are at least in part the same.
Absolutely, sir. I haven't had the honor yet.
There's been an undercurrent throughout a lot of our conversations, if not in our testimony, and maybe not even the purpose for our hearings, that the Contras aren't worth supporting, that they simply can't win. What's your view?
Sir, I think that if they receive enough help, enough aid, with other factors involved, which I don't think is appropriate to discuss it here, they will be able to win without the need of American troops. And if they don't succeed in Central America, if Nicaragua is not contained, I think there's very rapid deterioration of the surrounding countries. You will see a lot of, how you call it, exiles by the millions coming through Texas if we lose Central America. And there is no question in my mind, or anybody's mind, that Nicaragua, for the national security of this country, can prevail as a communist country.
From your own knowledge and your own contact with the people you've been in contact with, do the Contras have popular support in Nicaragua?
Yes, sir, I believe so. Most of them are very low class. They are farmers, and that's why most of the Nicaraguan government tried to evacuate some areas, because they are afraid and they know these people will join the Nicaraguan freedom fighters.
It isn't just to get them out of the way of the fighting.
No, sir. Just to prevent them to get more people in the Nicaraguan freedom fighters line.
In spite of the difficulties that came from the private effort, and I think a very legitimate criticism has been made over the dangers of trying to move into the private sector for support of a governmental objective. What would the Contras have done during a period of time when the Congress had voted to terminate aid if there hadn't been private support?
Well, sir, a lot of them would have been either annihilated, those who stay, and others will have to try to probably come to safe havens and wait until they were properly equipped and supported.
Is it better to have continued an operation even at a reduced level, or would it have been better to have just stopped all aid completely, both public and private, allowed them to leave the country, and then start the effort again at a later date?
Well, sir, this is one thing that cannot be controlled when you are fighting for your country. I don't think it's a decision of anybody to get them out or get them in. There will be people who will feel strongly to continue to fight until they die inside the country, and they will still stay in that country, regardless of the aid received or not.
I'm really getting at what happens to them while Congress debates policies. The Congress and the administration have disagreements, and the funding is started, and then it's stopped, and then it's restarted, and then stopped again. You testified earlier that you have a personal reason for a reaction to being abandoned in the field.
Yes, sir.
And that still motivates a lot of your attitudes and reactions today, does it not?
Yes, sir.
In spite of that action on the part of the United States, in which you were encouraged to take the field before the Bay of Pigs, that was official U.S. action, was it not?
Well, I learned that later. When I went in, I did it on my own, like all of the other Cubans did. And as a matter of fact, we learned what the CIA was after the Bay of Pigs when it was publicized.
You were going there on your own regardless?
Yes, sir.
All right.
A lot of us did.
It wasn't because the United States
No, sir.
of support that you went?
We saw the United States an ally who helped and supported us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, if I recall, yesterday you testified that you had lunch with someone in the State Department?
Yes, sir.
And
who used to be in the State Department.
And this someone sent you to see Colonel North?
Yes, sir. That was on the 21st, I believe, the 21st of December. 21st of December, 1984.
Not yesterday.
No, sir. That was 21st of December, 1984.
Now, who was this someone?
It was Mr. Bill Bodie, a friend of mine, who was an assistant to Undersecretary of State for Science and Technology. And he knew of my interest in going to Central America, and he knew that Colonel North had that area in his responsibility, and he told me it was a good idea that I should meet with Colonel North. So knowing that I was planning to visit Mr. Gregg, the White House, between 4 and 4:30 that day, he suggested that I meet with Colonel Norris, and he did call over the telephone. I believe he talked to Fons, his secretary, and made the arrangement so when I finished my meeting, I could come up and talk to the colonel.
The past 2 weeks, all of us have been receiving history lessons on Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. And I think all of the people of the United States should refresh their memories on what has been happening in this area. And I commend you for your dedication and your commitment. I note that you played an important role in the Bay of Pigs. Did you know Fulgencio Batista?
My family did, sir.
What sort of person was he?
I understand he was a man who was very, very poor. He was a work on the railroad, self-made. He was a sergeant in the army. He made a military coup and took over the country at one point in time. I was too young, and then just hearing by reference. My uncle was a senator at the time.
He has been described by some as the worst tyrant in the Caribbean. Would you agree with that?
Sir, at this point in time, I don't think any dictator will bring the stability that a country needs. I am going back to a long time. I was very young at the time, so I really would not have that much of an opinion, to be fair about it. But I think a lot of these take as a consequence what we have today.
Was he a dictator?
Yes, sir. A lot of people have called him that.
Do you think the United States should have supported Fulgencio Batista?
Sir, I think you have to look at the alternative. If you knew that Castro was communism, what is better, what is worse, I would think it would be taking...
I'm certain you know that at the time Mr. Batista was at his peak. Mr. Castro had not appeared yet.
Well, Castro appeared, I believe, in 1956, 54, when the Moncada attack. And
Mr. Batista appeared long before that.
Long before that. That's correct. I think he, in 1933, made a military coup. He ran for election. He lost, and he gave it to the whoever won. It was not him. Sometimes people got later on probably drunk with power, and it's bad, and it's wrong for the country.
So you think that Batista was good for the country?
There is a lot of opinion among the Cuban community, sir. Some will believe that at the time, of course it was not, we were looking for a better alternative. As it turned out, Castro was worse than Batista.
I have another question, sir. Do you know Robert Owen?
I met him twice, sir.
Are you familiar with the message that he sent to Mr. North February the 10th, 1986, in which he spoke of drug-carrying aircraft and drug-carrying crews that were hired by the CIA to carry goods into Nicaragua?
No, I was not aware of that, sir.
You've been in that part of the world for a long time. Were you aware of any drugs being transported out of Central America into the United States?
No, sir.
Never heard of that?
Well, I have heard of that, but direct knowledge of it I haven't, or participation in any type of that thing.
Did you hear of any activity by those contracted by Americans?
What I have seen in the paper, sir.
Other than that, you're not aware of it?
No, sir.
And finally, sir, I gather from your testimony you were so concerned with what was happening out there, and which you describe as worse than Watergate, that you made it a point to go to the White House to see Colonel North, Mr. Gregg. What did you expect Colonel North to do with the information?
Sir, when I went to see Colonel Norris, it was at his request, not at my request. And when they asked me to come up there, and I explained it to them to make him aware of it. And then I returned it when I was accused of stealing the aircraft, as I have said in this testimony, and I considered it was legal to talk to Mr. Gregg about it, and because it was already, Congress had approved the aid to the Nicaraguan freedom fighter, and I was concerned that this operation could be continued in hands that were not properly managing the program. I came and expressed my concern to Mr. Gregg.
What did you expect Mr. Gregg to do with the information?
Well, I think he called different agencies that had to do especially with the incoming program that Congress had approved and made them aware of it.
And who does Mr. Gregg work for?
Vice President.
And what did you expect Mr. North to do?
I didn't expect anything, sir. I really didn't came to my mind one way or the other.
You were so concerned and so incensed, and yet you told someone expecting him to do nothing about it?
Well, I was planning to leave, as I told you before, sir.
Weren't you dedicated to the cause of the freedom fighters?
Yes, sir.
Weren't you convinced that if these changes were not made, it would fail?
Yes, sir.
But you didn't expect anything to happen from your information?
No, I expected that when the Congress took over the program, they will use the agents in this program, and this other program that was wrong at this time, but these people will not be participant of it.
Well, Mr. Gregg works for the Vice President, but you didn't expect him to discuss this matter with the Vice President.
If I were him, I would not, and I don't expect him to do that, sir. Otherwise, I would ask him.
You didn't expect Mr. North to discuss it with anyone?
I didn't know what he was going to do, sir. He was very critical of me at the time, so I have no reason why. He didn't accept my my concern like valid. The way he expressed it, Mr. Klein was a patriot, so I just left, like I said here.
What did you consider Mr. North to be a very important person?
At the time, obviously, he was a very important person, sir.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. Mr. Rodriguez, still some confusion in my mind over this question of the quality of the operation and your concerns about it and point at which it changed. I know there's been some reference this morning to FIR number 6, the document that allegedly shows significant markups on materials that were provided. I note it's dated March 31st of '86, and that Mr. Dutton, of course, has testified previously that he started with the operation on the 1st of May of '86. Would it be accurate to say that there was an improvement in the operation after Mr. Dutton got involved in it?
What I believe, sir, was a coincidental that at that time, but that time the airplanes were getting their maintenance up to date. All of this time was taken to repair engines that were old, that had too many hours on it, and he arrived at the time when the aircraft were in better shape and could do the job.
Well, without giving him credit one way or the other, I don't want to get into the personality conflicts that appear to be involved here, but it's my understanding he fired some of the people involved that you had been critical of previously. Is that true?
That he fired?
Yes. Removed 2 of the individuals that were subject to some of the controversy.
I don't recall on my account that he fired anybody.
All right. Well, we'll go back and cover that later in the review of the deposition. Final, Mr. Rodriguez, one of the things that obviously we're interested in has been touched upon earlier by some of my colleagues, the on-again, off-again nature of congressional policy and the difficulty of knowing what, in fact, the intentions of the United States were likely to be long-term. You've got a lot of experience in this area. You've spent a lot of time on dealing with these kinds of situations and certainly have watched circumstances develop in Central America. Can you comment on the difference in terms of the perception on the part of the people at the local level as to the long-term commitment of the United States versus, say, the long-term commitment of the Soviet Union? I note, for example, the Sandinistas were in business for some 17 years before they were successful in overthrowing Somoza. The Soviet Union has supported the Sandinistas since they took power for 7 going on 8 years now, with over $3 billion of assistance in the last 4 years, and yet during that same 4-year period of time, we had about 5 different policies from the Congress.
Yes, sir.
Can you comment upon the impact that has on people's willingness at the local level to sign on either for the democratic forces or the communist forces?
Sir, the country that I have served in through these years have developed a lot of reservation toward the implementation of the United States policies, the inconsistency of it because of the different administration. The Soviet Union have a continuous policy. No matter who change in their hierarchy, they still pursue, and they have no time to pursue their goal, which is eventually take over this country. And everybody's quite aware of that. There are many countries we are very sympathetic with the Nicaraguan Contra cause, and some of them sort of stay in the, I could say, in the fence, because they don't know if they will compromise too much, and then they will be left hanging there by the United States policies.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Mr. Rodriguez, we thank you very much for your appearance. The committees will stand in recess until 2 o'clock.